Finally, this evening, we have our guest speaker, Lyndy McIntyre, who will be talking on, I presume, her recent book. And I'm sure everyone who hadn't already bought a copy managed to get one outside. I'm sure most of you know Lyndy and who she is anyway, but she is an Etu Life member, an associate fellow of the NZEI. She has worked for a large range of unions in Aotearoa and briefly in Australia. And in 2015, she took up the role of community organiser in the living wage movement until 2020, when 2020, when she started work on this book. And 4 years later, we see the fruit of those several years of, I suspect, very hard work putting that together. I don't think I need to say anything about the subject matter of the book, but obviously it's a very important book at times like this. When I was little, the minimum wage was supposed to be a safety net and not a target. And the living wage in between, I think, is a massive contribution to trying to get away from that sort of always go for the absolute minimum and go for at least something decent. And I'll invite and come up and tell you what she wants to tell you.
Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana ki te tangata whenua, te runanga o toa rangatira me taranaki whānui. E mihi ana ki a Gordon, Isabel, me te ropu Labour History Project. Mihi ana the National Library. Mihi ana te tangata Zoom. Tēnā koutou katoa. No kotorana no ingarangi o Kutipuna, he tangata tiriti ahau, ko Lyndy McIntyre ahau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Power to win, the power of workers' stories. So a few weeks ago, we launched this book, Power to Win. I've been to countless book launches, and some of those books have been written by brilliant people in this room. I can see two sitting up there, and congratulations, Jared, fine book. I never thought that I'd launch a book of my own. Thankfully, this is not my book. The book belongs to the living wage movement, belongs to the trade union movement, our allies across civil society, but above all, it belongs to the workers on every page. And actually, a bit of it belongs to the Labour History Project. And I just want to start out by acknowledging the generous grant of $2,000 from the Labour History Project to both support me with the book, but to me it was a very meaningful act of solidarity in 2020 when I began writing the book. I hope that Power to Win is a useful contribution to the rich tapestry of Aotearoa's labour history. More than anything, Power to Win is a collection of workers' stories. But I'll start off briefly, I hope, with my story. And Gordon's already really given you the guts of it. But this is kind of my labour history. I didn't grow up in a union family, but like lots of other women in kind of in the early 70s, the first union that I joined was the Clerical Workers Union, doing admin work in my university holidays. In 1981, as a single mother in need of work, I got a job at my brother's printing firm. I picked up a few skills on the job, and I went on to spend the 80s working mainly as a newspaper compositor. And there I learnt about being a union member, as a member, but as an activist and as a delegate in the Printers Union. That would be another book, if I had any inclination to write one. That's a joke. Thanks. I got my first union organising job in 1990 with the fabulous Northern Hotel and Hospital Workers Union. And that union became the Service and Food Workers Union, and then the union Etu. I went on from there to work for lots and lots of different unions. And so I've had the privilege of working alongside workers, a really wide range, from caregivers, cleaners, security guards, nurses, teachers, academics, a whole wide range of wonderful people. So after I left the union movement, as Gordon said, I had 5 years as a community organiser with the Living Wage movement. And then I started to write this book, Power to Win. And I want to share tonight some of the workers' stories. This talk's called The Power of the Story. I just want to drill down a bit into those workers' stories that are the heart of the Power to Win story, and talk a little bit about how they came to land in this book. I was really moved by the talk that Rebecca McPhee gave a few years back, a couple of years back maybe, on the sources for her fantastic Helen Kelly book. And this is not quite so complicated. This is about the sources of the stories in my book. Some of you here tonight were at the book launch a few weeks ago at Unity Books. One of the speakers at that launch was a wonderful worker called Rebecca Nyakuong Koach. I've got a photo of her here. Got a couple of photos actually. So there's Rebecca at the Unity book launch. I met Rebecca in 2014. She was a cleaner. That's a photograph of her. I'm sorry it's so pixelated actually. Must have been a bad choice because the photo is in the book. Oh, it's good for you. Good. So at that time in 2014, Rebecca was a cleaner at Victoria University, and she turned up at the very first action when TEU was slapping a claim on the university for the living wage. From that moment, she got really involved. She turned up at every event, and she always brought other cleaners with her. She twice spoke at large events, at large forums called Living Wage Days. A refugee from South Sudan, Rebecca has actually never been to school, so let alone been to a university. But when she talked to the crowd of students and academics, she held the crowd spellbound, talking about her background, her life on low wages, and her passionate commitment to winning the living wage for the cleaners and herself and other workers at the university, and that struggle goes on. But I'm going to come back to Rebecca. I'm going to take us to the first story really in the book, which is the story of these workers. This is a group of Service and Food Workers Union members, parliamentary cleaners in 2011. Those cleaners held a press conference at Parliament, and it was a press conference with a difference. They invited the MPs whose offices they cleaned and the media to come to lunch. And here's a bit of an example of what lunch was like. The table in front of them was spread with a typical sort of shopping basket of a worker on the minimum wage in 2011. One of those workers was a woman called Jane Ikirere. There she is with her vacuum cleaner. She'd been cleaning the Prime Minister's office, wait for it, for 20 years, different Prime Ministers. But she was still on a few cents more than the minimum wage. And that poverty wage forced her to work 2 jobs, 50 hours a week to make ends meet. Jane told media that a pay rise for her would mean food, putting food on the table, heating her home, and perhaps, possibly, a few presents for her grandchildren. Another one of those parliamentary cleaners was Marita Sinotti, who actually works now cleaning the National Library. She supported living wage campaigns by doing an interview with the Herald, and that photo on the left is from the Herald, and also by being willing to open her more than modest home in Cannons Creek in Pororua to a Campbell Live television film crew. It was a pretty humble home, to say the least. Marita's husband was sick and unable to work. She had 2 cleaning jobs to support her family. She did the night shift at the High Court down the road, and then at midnight moved across the road to Parliament to clean all night. I was with Marita when that film crew came to her home, and then with them overnight as the cleaners worked, and the film crew wandered around talking to them and filming and talking to MPs. In my experience, workers like Marita and Rebecca are more than happy to speak out, as long as we explain what to expect, talk through what they want to say, and make sure they have a voice, and support them on the day. The cleaners were more than happy, fairly overjoyed actually. It was a novelty, to say the least, to have the film crew in Parliament overnight. They wanted their story to be told. They wanted to have a voice. 5 years later, the parliamentary cleaners won the living wage, demonstrating that low-paid contracted workers with their unions and the support of faith groups and community in the living wage movement could win big pay increases for the lowest paid in our society, that people power wins. Power to Win is packed with stories like these, packed with stories about how worker stories have power, the power to win. I met many of these workers when I was working for the Service and Food Workers Union, and many of their stories are in the book. But something I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is how vital the role is of the union organisers who identify those workers, who understand that their job is about finding leaders, finding storytellers, and who ask those workers to share their stories, who give them the support they need, and ensure that if there are any problems, and there are problems, and we'll go on and talk about that, if there are any problems on the job, those problems are sorted. I'm going to talk about another worker now, and this worker is called Maliki Rahman. Maliki, this is a really powerful image for me. And I can see John Ryle up there, and maybe Muriel was there too, and maybe some of others of you were there that day at Wellington City Council when Maliki told his story to the councillors as part of the really successful campaign at Wellington City Council. Maliki's powerful speech to councillors set a precedent and for future actions and events that were part of that campaign. Every living wage event after he spoke to council that day included a worker's story. Maliki and his wife were migrants from Malaysia. They had 3 small children. With just one earner on the minimum wage, money was pretty tight. They dreamed of a wage that would enable them to heat their house, to have healthy food for their children, to buy shoes because winter was approaching, so to buy shoes for their 3 children for school. Maliki, again, like the others, was really happy to speak out. He was passionate, but it was by no means easy. Council managers actively discouraged workers from speaking, and for the contracted workers like the cleaners, they were even more vulnerable on the job. They couldn't afford to lose that income, but their willingness to share their stories was driven by a great sense of justice, a commitment to their union, and a desire, a passion to change things for their families and their communities. That was a really fantastic, powerful day, listening to Maliki share that story. It was quite amazing, and it was one of the first turning points in that successful campaign that transformed the lives of hundreds and hundreds of workers in our city. Another set of early stories in the book are the stories that came out of a Campbell Live series of minimum wage workers in New Zealand's biggest city, Auckland. One of those workers in that series was Kelly Belcher, a single mum who's pictured at the launch of the living wage movement in May 2012, sitting with someone you know pretty well, I'm sure. Helen Kelly was surrounded by the workers at that launch who had been part of that Campbell Live series. A Service and Food Workers Union organiser, Whala Halangi, was tasked with finding the workers for that program. Along with Whala, I didn't have to do that work. She found all those. I was the communications person for the Service and Food Workers Union at the time. Whala found all those workers, did all the legwork, but I went out and was present while the film team came into Kelly's house, spent hours and hours there, and came up with a fantastic, really powerful interview. But the work that Whala did was in prepping Kelly, talking with her about her story, making sure that she was confident and the right person to be on that television program. And she was fantastic. This single mum with a couple of young boy and a girl was really powerful. When I started writing Power to Win, I returned to these stories. Yes, I did still have them. And the speeches of workers like Maliki Rahman. There wouldn't be a book if it wasn't for these workers and for the work of organisers like Whala. Those organisers in lots of unions, but we certainly had our fair share in the Service and Food Workers Union, are skilled at finding members to tell their stories. That's to build the power to win. They know their members well. Their members trust them. But most importantly, they're not afraid to ask members to speak out and share their stories. Whala supported another worker who's in the book, and her name is Ika Hiko. And she was also part of the Campbell Live series. This photo and these beautiful photos of this launch are taken by Simon Oosterman Beckers. I'm just mentioning that because I know there are people in this room who know Simon, and he also took the cover photo of the book and generously, I won't use the word allowed with Simon, but was really happy about them being part of the book, which was great. So Ika had 2 part-time cleaning jobs, over 40 hours a week, and wait for it, 7 days. She and her husband, he was a full-time storeman, but they had 5 young children, and they owned their own home. But as you can imagine, despite the fact they had 2 incomes, it was tough finding the money for the mortgage, power rates, groceries, and the bills all piled up. Fala empathised with workers like Ika and other members, especially since she also had been a Pacific woman cleaner. And it was better than that. Fala understood why it was important to tell the stories of workers like Ika, and it was a very powerful story. In the book, Fala says, sitting down with members, hearing their stories, which were the reality of low-paid work, was empowering. It was inspiring. There are, of course, others who understand the power of workers' stories and have that skill. And I'm thinking of organisers like, and I'm naming these people because to me that brings it more to life. So I'm not singling them out by any means as the only people in the union movement who are doing this sort of work. But I'm thinking of people like Stella Tauriki and Maddie Drew, who have identified many workers in local government sites to share their stories as part of our campaigning in councils. And that's made a huge difference in the success of those campaigns. One of those workers, who's often at Labour history events, was PSA member and library assistant Eleanor Haggerty Drummond. Eleanor spoke, this isn't a photograph of this particular event, but Eleanor spoke as part of an early delegation of union leaders and community leaders to Wellington City Council. This required courage. As I said earlier, the council managers very actively discouraged anyone from having any voice, from speaking out publicly. Eleanor's story was about the undervaluing of the library assistants by their low pay, but also just no acknowledgement of the skill of the work that they were doing. Luckily, fortunately, her story was broadcast on Radio New Zealand that day because there'd been media present at the event. May have been Checkpoint, but definitely wasn't what council managers had in mind. But that sort of response didn't faze workers like Eleanor and like the others I'm talking about tonight. These real workers' stories are what won these campaigns over and over again. But collecting them is not without challenges, and sometimes it's not without risks. There's a section in the book entitled Courage Under Fire. This is a story of a campaign action that took place at Victoria University, Te Haerenga Waka, in 2017. It was the first living wage day, and I'm going to just return to another story about Rebecca Kuach. At that forum, and I'm sure Sibel was there that day, maybe Jim McAloon, maybe others, the students and academics largely. It was a huge crowd, 300 supporters of the living wage. So it was a great, really successful forum. Sophie, who's in the middle in this photo, told her story. It was great about the life life of a stretched student, having to work long hours in a low-paid job in the city. Thomas Martin, beside her, was also another library assistant, and he told his story of being undervalued by the university for the job that he did. And then Rebecca spoke. Rebecca had experienced extreme hardship and danger when her family fled from their war-torn homeland in South Sudan, and also living in refugee camps. And I just want to acknowledge now the work that Sibel Locke has done that's contributed to this book in documenting the stories of a number of refugee background workers who were part of a living wage photo exhibition in 2019. So a part of that story as well is I've used as a source in this book. Like many refugees coming to New Zealand, the only work that Rebecca could find was very low-paid cleaning. And she was as a single mother with 5 children, she ended up working long hours cleaning in a minimum wage job at the university. She was an E2 delegate, of course, despite the hard work, long hours, 5 children, and the drive out to Nainai every late at night and coming back early in the morning. And she was a staunch advocate for herself and the other cleaners. Luckily for her, her organiser was Ibrahim Omar from, at that time, E2, because Rebecca received a warning after speaking that day from her manager, and Ibrahim acted swiftly and made sure she kept her job. Rebecca is one of the most courageous people I've ever met, and her courage was tested again a year later. So 1 year later, there was another living wage day on 2018, and Rebecca immediately put up her hand to speak, despite the warning the previous year. And once again, her courage had negative consequences or repercussions. The student newspaper Salient reported on the forum and published a story of Rebecca talking passionately about the undervaluing of the cleaners and the need for them to be paid by the need for the university to ensure that through the contractors, they were paid the living wage. Once again, another letter came from her manager, and where Ibrahim, her organiser, was managing it, handling it. And there's a long story about this in the book, but to cut this shorter, I saw the email and could see that there was a thread, and the original email, which could not be interpreted any other way than a threatening, please explain, had originated from one of the comms team at Victoria University. In other words, please explain why this woman is standing up and demanding the living wage for the cleaners. It's embarrassing for the university. So the story's in the book. I hope you enjoy reading it. Needless to say, Rebecca didn't lose her job, but it did require not a threat, but a demonstration of the potential power of Living Wage Wellington and what would happen if anything happened to that courageous woman in speaking out for the living wage for herself and for other workers. Activist workers like Rebecca, like Maliki, like Eleanor are very courageous. Their stories have power. They have the power to win the living wage. Throughout my time working in unions, I've heard many, many workers' stories. I've been moved by them. They've changed the way I see the world. They make me committed to make a difference. Workers' stories have incredible power, and Power to Win is a tribute to those workers who tell their stories. It's also a bit of a tribute to to the organisers and the unions who stand behind and support their workers to tell their stories. Worker stories build unions, they build workers, and they build our power to win. There's one more worker story I want to talk about this evening. When I looked for a cover image, I wanted a photo that conveyed the message of hope of the living wage movement. A photo that had a worker right in the centre, a worker who was part of the movement, a worker who was surrounded by the support of civil society, of unions, faith groups, and community who were committed to making a difference and getting rid of low-paid wages forever. The cover photo of Palu Talafolo tells that story. It was taken at the launch in May in 2012 at St Stephen's Church in Jervois Road in Auckland. Palu was one of Fala's members. She was a cleaner who just came along to the launch because she was committed to fighting the living wage, for the living wage. Her story was collected as potentially one of the Campbell Live stories. And I went back to have another look at Palu's story when I was choosing the photo for the cover. And I read this. Sometimes her children ask her why they moved from Tonga when it's so hard to survive here. She tells them they have come for a better life. But, she said, a better life needs a living wage. And just to explain those two photos, I haven't seen Palu since 2012. And at the E2 Delegates Conference last week, maybe week before, yeah, Muriel's saying last week, a wonderful thing happened. Palu's been away for some years, but we invited her, and Fala invited her to come along to the conference, and there she is receiving her certificate of appreciation from her union, from her comrades, from other cleaners, from other workers who she's given hope to through telling her story, through lending her face, her inspiration to be that person on the cover of the book. And that was a wonderful moment, as you can see, at that conference. So Power to Win sets out to inspire activism, to build the power we need to win decent wages and transform the lives of workers, their whānau and their community, and to demonstrate that community organising can create real change, can achieve victories for workers, the unions, and for our community allies. Without worker stories and without the unions and union organisers that support workers to tell their stories, that would be impossible, wouldn't have happened. So that's how this book happened. That's how it came together, and that's what it's all about. Kia kaha, kia manawa nui, kia tau te rangi Māori e. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And there was a great talk, and I think gave everyone a real flavour of the work of the many people that went into the writing of this book. Obviously not just the writer, it's the information you get and how they give it to you and all those sort of things, as I'm sure anyone who's had anything to do with that sort of thing knows. Well, that's the final aspect of this evening. Again, thanks very much. Yeah, I heard a rumour there was one around. I should have said